Hey everyone. Finished Game of Thrones 2 or 3 nights ago. I caught up. I wanted to talk about it. I figured I'd try it as a live stream just because I've been recording all my videos on my phone. I just wanted to try something different. Honestly, looking at the image right now, it kind of seems a little worse. This is my room, that house where I grew up. Um, I do want to get into it. Just because it's a live stream doesn't mean it's going to be super long. Um, so I just wanted to talk a bit about Game of Thrones, what makes it good, what makes it not so good. And season 7 especially is interesting because it is not as well liked by a lot of the fans. So to start with, the thing that makes Game of Thrones good is the fact that it plays such a long game with the characters and the world. The scale is so huge with so many characters. And some of the stories that are told span the entire series in sort of sometimes an effortless sort of way. And I feel like maybe I'm not an expert, but I feel like you don't see that in fantasy media that's not books. Obviously, books are great for this sort of thing. You have book series that are 30 books long, and every one is just extremely detailed. I haven't read a lot of series like that, but I know they exist. Um, you have manga series that have arcs for characters that go over hundreds of chapters. But especially in a fantasy TV show, you don't really see things like that much. Is that really? I didn't know. That's like when I click the Tumblr, that's way light. Is it the Tumblrs where my notes are? We're learning here about YouTube streaming. I hope my mic's all right. And some of these things in Game of Thrones, they're so really they are really good. I think even when they're not the most well constructed arcs, things like Jamie Lannister's arc, where he sort of, I think, kind of has this arc where he turns into a good guy, kind of out of nowhere. When they start the arc, it sort of comes out of nowhere, um, because he's really kind of an asshole up until he starts going with Brienne and he gets his hand cut off. Then suddenly he kind of starts getting better. But once that arc starts, it's good. I would say he kind of has a lot of things that sort of test him, and you kind of see this push and pull between the side of him that loves Cersei and the side of him that loves Tyrion, basically, and Brienne. And that's a really cool arc, and that arc is consistent throughout the entire show, which is usually a lot of the arcs that aren't. One specific arc I want to talk about that isn't really too consistent, that they kind of take breaks in it and stuff, is Theon's arc. Theon's arc is especially interesting because it's just crazy. It's the story of this guy who, like, he starts the series being one way, and he kind of ends, and it hasn't ended yet, being a very different way. And he really finds out who he is over the course of the series. And he's broken down and built back up again in a crazy way. When he becomes Ramsay's slave, basically, I sort of wanted them to kind of just end it for him, and just say, well, just have him commit suicide, have him die in some weird way, just kind of end it for Theon. Let it be done with it. He's had such a bad time. But they decided to keep him around, and for a while, like I said, his arc kind of stops. I think once he escapes, well, it's really once him and Yara, I guess, escape from uh, the Iron Islands. He does kind of jump ship early in season 7, but then you don't get anything with him until the end of season 7. You get like one scene with him and John, and there's kind of other things like that where they just kind of leave him alone when he's weak for a while. But the finale of season 7 has the scene which is so cool for his arc, where he fights one of the Iron Islands guys that he's with. The Yeah, and he wins the fight, and then he kind of is trying to kind of rally his the other guys with a speech, and he's pretty successful at that. Even if he has to take a lot of hits to sort of get it done. And it's such a great contrast with a scene earlier after he's taken Winterfell. And at this point, he's still wishy washy. You can tell that he doesn't really believe that taking Winterfell is the right thing to do, and that he's not super committed to leading the Iron Islands guys, but he wants to be. But that's not good enough for the guys who are following him at that point. So he gives this big rousing speech. Oh, we're going to go out there. We're going to sacrifice our lives, and then they knock him over the head, and that's kind of where he ends up with Ramsay. And I really feel like the scene at the end of season 7 was written as lowering the brightness a little here, was written as a specific contrast to that, where he is so steadfast in this, even if he was a person that was a coward, even if he still kind of, up until very recently was, he really believes in what he's saying at that point. And what he's saying is very self-effacing. He's saying, don't do it for me, do it for my sister. And, there's a guy who attempts to hit him, just like the guy hit him on the head back then, but he takes those hits and he just says, you're not gonna, win this time. And of course they do something which I thought they might do, where they have the guy knee him in the crotch several times, but Theon does not have Natalia anymore. So that was pretty hilarious. And it sort of worked, because it's like, I'm not going to say that his lack of genitalia is a strength, but it's something that he has sort of come to terms with and saying, this is who I am. And that's what Jon kind of helps him realize earlier in that episode. And now, even after taking a bunch of hits, all he says is, don't do it for me, do it for her. And that gets all those guys to follow him. And I think that's really beautiful. I think that's the kind of thing where you go, wow, like, this is why you watch 70 hours of the show. And obviously there's a lot of cool stuff with the world itself that's revealed over time. Things like locations that are teased for a long time and then not revealed until much later. I do wish we would have gotten a little more fanfare for Casterly Rock and Highgarden, which were both talked about a lot, introduced in the same episode, and we didn't get to spend time there. They were just kind of the sites of some battles. But I mean, to finally see the Dragon Skulls under the Red Keep, to finally kind of get these flashbacks of Ned Stark that you get in season 6. And the show rewards careful viewing, where this whole twist, which, spoiler alert, obviously, as I've been talking about spoilers, this is a major spoiler for the season finale, that Jon Snow is Daenerys' I think, nephew. That twist is teased for a while. I think even before Bran sees any of that flashback with Ned, they say earlier, they talk about how Rhaegar took a liking to Lyanna, and just based on the story you hear about him kidnapping her, you can kind of think, oh, but it's not mentioned that much. They clearly don't want you to think about it, but if you do think about it, then you could come up with that truth pretty easily. No one did in the world of the show. And just stuff like the children, where the first men, and you see them in the special features of the season 1 DVD, where people talk about them, and then you finally see them in the end of season 4 and then season 6, and just a lot of really cool stuff like that. Grayscale, for instance, that's like kind of an arc with Grayscale throughout the whole show, where you first see it on Shireen and it's healed. Then you see the actual Stone Men on Volantis and they attack Jorah, and then Jorah gets Grayscale, and you really get to see that kind of progress. And then you get to see it cured with Sammo, which is kind of an amazing meeting in itself. The Citadel in Old Town is something that I wanted to see ever since they kind of mentioned, the Maestro train in a specific place early in the show. And that's what's really good about the show. You really don't get a lot of shows that do it in that specific way that Game of Thrones does it. Because it's the pacing of Game of Thrones is often so slow that it feels much different than something that's like a series of movies. You have characters who spend an entire season traveling from place to place, and then we get scenes of them traveling, and a lot of the scenes might be just conversation. But there's things in those in that conversation. There's kind of a complaint that you can level at a lot of dramas where the premiere and the finale are the only important things. And Game of Thrones does kind of have that sometimes. Often, they'll have a big thing. They usually actually Game of Thrones premieres are usually not that big from what I remember. It's usually episode 2, 3, or 4. They'll have some huge thing like Joffrey's death. Then episode 9 of the season out of the usual 10 will be the episode where the biggest thing of the season happens. The Red Wedding, the Battle on the Wall, the Battle of the Bastards, and all that. Then the season finale will usually have some kind of reveal, some kind of cool development, and then it'll end with something with the dragons, as it always does, which kind of annoys me. It's like, can't you end on like a dramatic beat or something? Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, so that's a complaint you could have about Western shows where the finale and the premiere are usually only things that are important. Often they're the things that the writers think of first, and you might say, oh, they're just kind of wasting their time, just wondering what they should do, kind of treading water for the rest of the season. And you could say that that's somewhat true, but also keep in mind that Game of Thrones is based on books where this is not as big of a problem. A lot of these scenes do impart something about the characters often. Or there are major events. You can have a character that is doing one thing for half a season and doing a totally different thing for the next half of the season. And it's just really interesting to kind of see these stories play out over so long. To see the sort of Stannis Baratheon thing play out and this sort of Melisandre Lord of Light thing play out. The Lord of Light thing is one of the most interesting things to me because I think it's the sort of the plot thread of the story that's been covered the least, obviously because it's magical and crazy and important. And those play out at a pace different from how an arc would play out in really any other show, I think. And the pace gets faster as the show goes on, which at first is pretty cool. In season 6, it really starts to pick up, and you think, oh well, this makes sense because the stories are consolidating, they're coming together, we're finding things out, and things are moving. In season 7, gets a bit too fast. And that's one of my problems with season 7. I do want to talk about season 7 because a lot of people have problems with it, and I haven't really read articles about that since I finished it, but I can sort of surmise what a lot of these problems were. Let me look at my notes here. What else did I have? Yeah, the show quickens the pace so much that it kind of doesn't feel the same anymore, Part of Game of Thrones was the leisurely pacing. And when it loses that, it kind of feels less like Game of Thrones. Season 6 was a good midpoint. Season 7 is a bit too quick often. You have characters that the entire expedition behind the wall was one episode. I'm like, come on, I don't know, we don't want to spend some time there. I know they did it already, but still. And then there's some characters and plot threads that are rushed. Eulan Greyjoy specifically is so weird. And I saw a YouTube thumbnail had a recommended video about how much he sucks. So I have a feeling I'm not the only one who shares his opinion. He's kind of like a Gary Stu a little bit, where he's put in there and he's just like this crazy guy, and he's like has this sneer, and he just kind of gets what he wants, and he's super powerful for no reason. Like he just built this whole army of ships, and he's badass and cool and powerful. And he's got his eyes on Cersei, and Cersei kind of likes him. And he pisses off Jaime, and the dude just always kind of wins a lot throughout the season, and he only comes in at the end of season 6, and I don't know if you hear about him before that. So that was weird. And the Daenerys Jon Snow pairing is freaking weird. I don't really see why they wanted to do that other than to have it be like a what-oh thing, and they revealed that they're related, like a Star Wars or something. Because there's they can be friends. Like that would kind of serve the purpose of I think the story. I don't know. Maybe they're doing something interesting with Daenerys and Dario or some kind of love thing. I don't know what they're planning, but even if it ends up being the right thing to do, it was done way too quick. They hardly. They have scenes together, but it's just like characters kind of tell us that Jon seems to like her, and we don't really see that much. And then they have the scene where John is in bed after the battle, and that's kind of where they really start pushing the romance angle. And it's like it doesn't feel earned. Um, and there's just kind of a bunch of stuff in season 7 like that. It's just a very quick season. I kind of would have liked to see more of Sam at the Citadel. I would have liked to hear him talk to Jorah more. It's funny how we see him start the surgery on Jorah, which is one of the best scenes in the season. How crazy it is. And then we never hear them talk about that again. Like it's obviously a lot of it's kind of implied, but like that's got to be a crazy procedure. Like I mean, you would go through more pain than someone who's actually being flayed alive, basically. And yet, I don't know, like we never see Jorah like talk about what that was like to Daenerys or anybody. Like you'd think Varys would be like kind of interested or something. I don't know, Tyrion. Um, and then when he meets John later, he doesn't mention Sam to John. Like why? Um, Obviously, the budget of the show is amazing, and that's obviously something that kind of makes season 7 pretty cool. Is that season 7 is bigger than any other season by far in terms of the budget, and they really have a lot of cool battles in there. But in the end, it does feel kind of different. And there's only 7 episodes, and season 8 is only going to be 6 episodes. So I kind of wonder if that crazy pacing is just going to get worse. Um, you know, especially now that the Winterfell stuff. I mean, the dead are here. The White Walkers are there, so it's gonna go. Something I want to talk about is the amount of death in the show. And this is obviously something you hear about so much before going to the show. I knew a lot of the characters that were going to die in the show, right down to Littlefinger in the season 7 finale. I knew that before I saw it. It was a great scene, regardless. That's something an aside about Littlefinger. Is it's really cool what they did with him because he definitely takes a back seat in season 6. Maybe season 5 a bit too. No, because season 5 is the stuff with the veil. So no, it's season 6 is the one he just kind of like is almost inconsequential during that season. He comes to Winterfell at the end with the Knights of the Vale, and but really, like from what I recall, he hardly does anything. And when season 7 started, I was like, I know Littlefinger's going to die. They need to do something with him first. Like it would have been really lame and they could have done this if they didn't want to deal with it. If they had better things to deal with, they just kind of have Bran do his thing and go, oh, Littlefinger's been conniving, and then just have Arya kill him right there. But they did go that extra mile and have him do one of his Littlefinger plans. So you can sort of see again. You can be reminded how bad this guy is. So I thought that was really cool. Yeah, the amount of death in the show, I knew about a lot of the characters that were going to die. And you sort of get the impression that the show maybe doesn't really care. I was kind of expecting so many characters to die. I was expecting so many likable characters to die that it would just kind of give you this hollow feeling that the show was just killing off people for fun because it pissed people off. But you really come to see that the show doesn't do that. The show sort of makes sure to complete people's arcs before they kill them, and it always kills characters in just a way that really matters. And the most important thing is that you have these characters like Podrick, Bronn, and Sam. Really, Podrick and Sam are very similar to each other. Bronn is sort of different, but these are all characters whose role in the show is essentially to be good influences on people, to sort of be friends, to be nice, to be very positive. And Sam and Podrick are obviously very positive people who only want to do good in the world. And you expect them to die. I think watching the show, you think, oh, here's when Sam dies. He's coming back to the wall with Gilly. Here's where he dies, and Gilly has to run to the wall on her own. Here, Gilly is now in, was it Mosstown, and the wildlings attack. Sam's gonna go save her, and he's gonna die. I was sure that was going to happen. But we're in season 7, and Sam's still here. Podrick's still here, and that's a really cool way to say that even though Westeros is like kind of an awful place to be, if you are a guy who is A, not super important, and B, good-natured, you can get by just on that good nature. Even Bronn, is a guy who's gotten so many scrapes to the degree where it's a little much. There are some characters like John where it's like you were in this horde of zombies and you're just like fine. You're just fine. Thank God they killed Thoros on that expedition. Because if only these cannon fodder wildlings died, that would have been so lame. It does seem like the main characters do have plot armor, is what they call it. But it's still nice to see Braun continue to live, because he's just not a guy that deserves to have that kind of harsh judgment. And it's nice that George R. R. Martin or the show or the writer of the show knew to have these characters in here to sort of make us feel better about all the deaths, which do happen to good people from time to time. I think that's about all I have to say about Game of Thrones. I definitely feel it's worth watching. Just seeing the show from a production standpoint grow is interesting because you can really tell the budget as it grows throughout the seasons. You can tell that the sets just kind of get slightly bigger a lot of the time. The city shots look more realistic. You go to more locations in the later seasons. So just from a production standpoint, it's so interesting. And it's interesting to sort of get an idea, which I only have an idea of it, of what it was the fan experience was like. With the Red Wedding and all that, where the show was already popular in season 1. But it only really got popular in season 4, and then it continued to grow. There was, I think, a lull in, I want to say, season 5. But then season 6 and 7 still continue to grow in viewership to amazing amounts. And, the budget grew with it, and the cast, was so huge. It's getting smaller now, but it was so huge. So that's just my Game of Thrones video. It's probably about as long as I expected it to be. I don't really think I said anything of substance, to be honest. But I did want to talk about it a little since I've watched so much of it over the past few months. I try to watch around one episode a day. And I missed out on several days, but man, I swear for around 60 something, late 60s episodes, the number, I must have watched it all in 3 months, which is really rare for me for a show. I feel like it must have been around that, right? Like December, November, October, September. It was definitely late August, early September where I started it. That's rare, very rare for me to watch a show that quick. I do not binge. And I was not hooked necessarily on Game of Thrones. I don't really get hooked on things. It's just I just needed to get it done. I need to get through it. Certainly where there were things, plotlines I wanted to see resolved. Anyway, I won't bore you any longer. That's the live stream. I hope it worked out well. I hope the mic worked out well. I'm going to take a big drink of water now, and thanks for watching.